Hello again, folks. Got a happy little coincidence to share with you. One of you sent me a wonderful email this week in which you explained that you'd received your grandfather's stamp collection and wanted to learn more about it. And I loved your email, as well as your coffees, thank you. And what I loved about it was your question wasn't, how much can I get for my grandfather's stamps? Or how do I sell my grandfather's stamp collection? Your question was, what can I learn from it? And so I thought I would share what I've learned from my grandfather's stamp collection. And the timing is wonderful because I just received something very special from him. So my grandfather was a very special figure in my life. Good old horse face. Right here. He was a source of never-ending support and unconditional love. And I always felt safe in his house. I always knew that he was a stamp collector. You know, in kind of the same way that I knew my aunt was left-handed. It was just a reality about my grandfather. He collected stamps. And then about 10 years ago or so, I started to pursue the hobby myself. And I felt very much like I was following in his footsteps. It felt like such a connection to somebody I cared so much about. His collection still lives with my aunts. And they came to visit a few weeks ago, and they brought this little packet, and then they brought this. And this was my grandfather's tongs. It is now one of the most cherished parts of my stamp collection. And in this packet are some amazing lessons to learn about stamp collecting that I thought I would share with you, along with a couple of cool stamps to look at. The first thing I noticed when I opened this, when I received this, was that if you put your nose deep into this packet of stamps and you smell, you can almost smell their basement. And it was a basement with a pool table and a fold-out couch that I spent so many hours in as a kid, and this smell warms my heart. And so what did I learn from my grandfather's stamp collection? First and foremost, it's a connection to our past. For me, it's a personal connection to that guy. For some, it's a personal connection to people that went before us, because these little pieces of paper have such history to tell. I also learned that sorting stamps is one of the most enjoyable and relaxing activities I know. Stamp collecting is not about collecting stuff. It's not about putting together a collection. I mean, that's part of it. But it's an activity. It's a way of life. It's how I relax. It's how I connect to good folks like you. And so it's about a lot more than what it's worth, or, you know, if I inherited his stamps, they would mean so much more to me than dollars and cents. And so what would I do? This was the specific question I got in that email, was what do I do to figure out what stamps I have? The first thing I would do is I would start sorting them by country. And oftentimes, you can find the country listed right on the stamp, in English a lot of times. And you just start making piles of stamps based on country. If you can't tell the country based on what's on the stamp, take a couple of the words or any of the descriptive parts of the stamp itself and just Google it. Enter, Norge, Norge, which I'm sure is not how you pronounce that, and plus stamp, Google it, and it will tell you that that's from Norway. So then you've identified the country. Find yourself a stamp catalog, either at the library. There are sets of stamp catalogs at most libraries that you can check out, or online, stampworld.com. And once you know the country, you'll be able to open up these catalogs, find the right country, and just flip through until you see the picture of your stamp. And then from there, you can identify it based on the information below. You can figure out the year it was made. Depending on the catalog, you might find some information on who's on the stamp itself. For example, there's Eugene O'Neill, a wonderful playwright. You can find monetary information, value if you'd like. And that's how you can start to identify stamps. From there are going to be some that you need to figure out what perforation it is. And perforation is the little knobs at the end of the stamp that connect to the next stamp on the page. And you fold them, you rip them, and you have an individual stamp. Those perforations on the bottom are different sizes. And so get yourself a perforation gauge, and that will be able to, and then from there you'll be able to identify which perforation your stamp is. Sometimes that matters. Look at this one. Oh, is that special? I learned from my grandfather's stamp collection that stories are powerful. That joy comes from small things sometimes. That connections between us are more powerful than what separates us. That's what I learned. And I say that because this tiny little stamp right here, this 1 cent Washington from I think 1950 something probably, is one of the most common stamps. And yet to me, right now, in this moment, it's incredibly meaningful because my grandfather spent time in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And so that's why he saved this stamp in this packet. And so I know that his intention, his desire, was to keep this stamp separate and special because of the connection to his past, and so therefore it's a connection for me. And so what can you learn from your grandfather's stamps? You can probably learn a lot about him. All right, so you've sorted by country. Maybe you've found a perforation or two. There are also different types of paper that you can identify. And there are different, and the year of your stamp, when it was produced, is oftentimes determined by the watermark on the paper itself. And to determine that, you can use lighter fluids, some people actually use. There is philatelic watermark, what's the right term? Highlighting solution that you pour on the stamp, you hold it up to a light source, and you can see the watermark. That will help you determine which stamp it is and what year it was made for some. once you've figured out your stamp and what it is, from there, you can start to explore its history. For example, this guy. This is a telegraph stamp. This was used to pay for sending a telegraph. And so maybe this little stamp sends you on a journey to learn about, the evolution of how we communicated to each other. Again, it's the connection. Condition matters a lot in stamps. You'll see that this one is new. The gum on the back is completely undisturbed, so it's never hinged. It was never put into an album. And so maybe you start paying attention to condition of stamps. I know this to be a Cinderella stamp. What that means is it was produced and printed much like any stamp, but it was never intended to be put on a envelope and used as postage. It was created for other purposes. So stamp collectors collect them. We call them Cinderella stamps. This is a definitive stamp. It was as opposed to commemorative stamps, which commemorate an event or a historical, something historic. Look at all those strip of 6. That's kind of cool. Oh, there's another Fort Wayne, Indiana. Look at that. So again, sorting stamps is incredibly relaxing and incredibly rewarding. That's what I ultimately learned, is that by getting into this hobby, you will find a community of people who are passionate about these little tiny pieces of paper. And while it is about the paper, it is about the stamps, it's about the benefits that stamp collecting brings to our lives. It's about relationships that we build. It's about things we learn. It's about relaxing and the pride of putting together a collection that you're proud of. Look at this. I might get a little emotional on this one. My grandfather was a fisherman. This is 1987 Wisconsin trout stamp. He loved to fish. And we actually spread his ashes in a trout stream. Connection. It's a connection. Obviously, he cared about trout stamps. This one's kind of cool. It has it has the plate block number on the top. A little more rare, a little more sought after. More trout stamps. I do wonder if any of these were from an expedition he took. I'm not sure, but I sure do like the opportunity to think about him. And then in this packet, I found little strips of paper with his writing on it. Absolutely cherishable. And it leads me to the final thing I learned from my grandfather's stamps. And this is going to be a hard moment for some of you, I know. And I can relate to it because I went through something very similar with my baseball card collection from my childhood. My grandfather was a financially astute individual who invested in things and one of the things he chose to invest in was stamps. He saw his stamp collection as an asset and spent good money putting together a nice collection that that interested him. But he had an eye on the financial possibilities of stamp collecting. I know that he was putting together his collection with an eye on it being valuable down the road. And the reason I know that is because of this last piece of paper in here, which he had cut out and shows this. So this is 1983. In 1983, the average annual return on investment for stamps was 21.9%. By comparison, stocks was 3.9%. So like many, my grandfather saw his stamp collection as an investment that was going to pay off over time. And what we know happened next, probably quickly after this piece of paper was printed, after this newspaper was printed, is the collectible stamp market crashed. It crashed before eBay. And then the internet came along and it fell further. And so what began was a process that stamp collecting and philatelists everywhere went through, where hopes and dreams were crushed. Let's be honest. A lot of people thought that their collections were an investment that were going to pay off down the road. And for many, like old Horseface here, that just didn't pan out. It was a bubble, and it crashed. And so what began was a shift in our mindsets as collectors to a, I think, more healthy approach to collecting, which is to put the emphasis on the joy, the empowerment, the pride you can get from collecting, the relaxing nature of the hobby, the things you learn, all the intangible benefits to stamp collecting, and less so on the financial realities of what our collections are worth. That isn't to say that stamps aren't still valuable. They are. Especially ones that you pay good money for. You can expect some level of growth in their evaluation, in their valuation. But by and large, stamps are no longer seen as the next hot investment opportunity, and I wouldn't have it any other way. On my channel, time and time again, I mention that stamp collecting is much more than dollars and cents. And this is why. We no longer see the hobby as this. We no longer want to be part of, let's get rich off of our hobby. We no longer want to be part of our culture's focus on getting rich quick, or on making a buck, or on having your hobby pay off. All of those kinds of things, all of those kinds of mindsets don't apply to stamps. They just don't. And it's not just, getting over our disappointment from the crash in the 80s. It's also simply the reality of collectibles. A collectible only becomes an asset when you sell it. Up until then, it's like an heirloom. It's like something that you cherish. And I can tell you from personal experience, converting those heirlooms into cash isn't easy, takes time, and you may very well regret it. Because what you miss when you make that decision, what you give up when you sell an heirloom, is an opportunity to hold a stamp that your grandfather squirreled away because it reminded him of his home. And that, to me, is so much more valuable than the 50 cents I could get by selling a stamp, or whatever the case is. Like, this isn't worth 50 cents, but you know what I mean. That connection. And then from there, the inspiration it gave me to dive into this hobby, I can't put a price tag on it. So thank you, grandfather. What I learned ultimately from this little part of his collection is that I love stamps. I love my grandfather. I love history. I love art. I love the process of stamp collecting. And so, yes, I encourage you, as you consider what to do with your grandfather's stamps, to spend time with them, to sort them, to love them, to learn what you can from them, and then put them someplace safe. And, 5 years from now, pull them out again. You'll see something new. You'll learn something new. And I guarantee you, you won't regret keeping them. I've kind of gone back and forth a bit on the financial side of our hobby, because I do think it's important to know, what collectibles are worth. Mostly so I know I'm not paying too much for them. But I ultimately do not want the financial side of things to distract from why I care so much about this hobby. And it's from this guy. And it's from his stamps. And it's from the collection that he's inspired me to put together. So back to the wonderful human being who sent me that email. Congrats on receiving a wonderful inheritance from your grandfather. I hope it inspires you to start a journey in philately. It will be endlessly fascinating, I guarantee. And with that, if you liked today's video, please go ahead and like it, and do subscribe to the channel. It means a great deal to me. Until next time, take care.